Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1172 for July 26th, 2026. Coming up in a few minutes.
He's really set the foundation for the company today, this creation of kind of pioneering and innovating and trying something new. But also focusing all the time on something that's really good quality, so that your customers really appreciate it.
2026 is the 180th anniversary of the founding of John Dewar and Sons, from a tiny spirits shop in Perth, Scotland, to a global brand today. Jacqui Seargeant is the chief archivist for Dewar's and Olive Bacardi, and she's been tracking that history for more than 2 decades. I'll talk with Jacqui Seargeant later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. This week's tasting notes include a pair of Janes, I'll explain later, and we'll go behind the label as well. It's all ahead on this week's WhiskyCast, whiskey's longest-running and most awarded podcast series. Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by Dewar's. U.S. President Donald Trump is at it again. He announced plans this week to impose a 50% tariff on Canadian whiskey and other spirits to retaliate for the Canadian provincial boycott of American spirits and wines. The tariff is part of a larger package of 50% tariffs designed to retaliate for what Trump calls unfair treatment of U.S. dairy, alcohol, and automotive exports. The tariffs will go into effect in 30 days, leaving time for negotiations with Canada, and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says his country will consider retaliating if no deal is reached. Trump also announced plans to impose tariffs of 10 to 15% on most of America's trading partners, ostensibly for failing to protect against the use of forced labor. The list includes the European Union, which already faces a 10% tariff rate. The new tariffs are already being challenged in court. Meanwhile, Trump signed an executive order this week officially ending the tariff on Scotch whiskey and other UK spirits. He had said he would drop the tariff after a state visit to Great Britain earlier this year. Canada's response to the U.S. tariffs was to look inward for more trade. 9 premiers have agreed to allow direct-to-consumer shipping of alcohol across provincial borders, something that's been illegal until now. The move would allow Canadian distillers to ship directly to consumers without going through a retailer and make more Canadian spirits available nationwide. The provinces signing off on the agreement include British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland and Labrador. Quebec and Yukon are expected to sign the agreement in the future. In other news this week, the owners of Moonshine University in Louisville, Kentucky, have announced plans to shut it down at the end of the year. Flavorman wants to focus on its drinks consulting business. Work is underway to find a new home for the school's educational programs, which have taught hundreds of whiskey makers over the last 14 years. The university is also the home of the Stave and Thief Society, which runs the executive bourbon steward courses. Those are expected to continue with a new home as well. All classes scheduled through the end of the year will take place as scheduled. The lack of demand for fresh barrels is forcing Independent Stave Company to shut down its cooperage in Alabama. Independent Stave bought the former Jack Daniel cooperage from Brown-Forman 2 years ago. 71 people are expected to lose their jobs when the cooperage shuts down for good in September. Now for our latest update in the Uncle Nearest saga. Friday, receiver Philip Young Jr. closed on the sale of the Martha's Vineyard house Fawn and Keith Weaver bought to entertain guests. The property sold for just under $2.6 million, and Young is holding on to the $818,000 that were left after paying off the mortgage, closing costs, taxes, and real estate commissions. The money will be used for receivership costs, meaning it won't go to Farm Credit Mid-America, the lender who took Uncle Nearest into receivership over more than $100 million in unpaid loans. Tales of the Cocktail was this week in New Orleans, and we got a few announcements of new whiskeys as a result. Four Roses is out with another innovation. Four Roses 100 proof will be rolling out to bars and restaurants nationwide. It's designed for use in cocktails, where the standard Four Roses 80 proof has been a popular choice because of its high rye content. The 100 proof is expected to be even more popular with bartenders who prefer using a higher proof whiskey in their drinks. It's not going to be sold at retailers, though, meaning the only way we'll get to try it is by ordering a neat pour at a bar. Bulleit is out with a new Bulleit 87 American whiskey. It's a blend of Bulleit's own bourbon and MGP rye, aged separately for 4 years and finished in barrels with toasted American and French oak staves. The 87 comes from the year Tom Bulleit founded his bourbon brand in 1987, and the whiskey will be priced at $29.99 a bottle. Yellowstone Bourbon is out with its 2026 limited edition, finished in a combination of ruby and tawny port casks. It's a blend of 7- and 14-year-old bourbons finished separately in the port wine casks, then blended and bottled at 50.5% ABV or 101 proof. It's available now at the distillery in Lebanon, Kentucky, and will be available at retailers next month with a suggested retail price of $99 a bottle. Kentucky's Larrikin Bourbon Company is releasing a new 9-year-old rye whiskey this coming Thursday. There's a happy hour release party at the distillery in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, to celebrate the release. Bardstown Bourbon Company has a new Kentucky-exclusive bottling. The Victoria Pineapple Barrel Finish whiskey was an attempt to figure out what causes tropical fruit flavors in American whiskey. It's a blend of bourbon and rye married and finished in Caribbean pineapple rum casks, and fresh pineapple was added to the barrels during maturation. It's the first release in a new finishing series from Bardstown Bourbon Company and will be available at the distillery and its Louisville tasting room for $139.99 a bottle. Turning to Scotland now, Deanston's new 17-year-old orange wine cask-finished single malt is now available in the U.S. It was matured for 15 years in ex-bourbon barrels, with the final 2 years in Vino de Naranjo wine casks from Spain. Only 7,000 bottles are available worldwide, with a recommended retail price in the U.S. of $131.99 a bottle. Glenglassaugh is out with its oldest whiskey in the distillery's core range, a 15-year-old single malt matured in a combination of PX sherry and Rioja red wine casks. It's available for $110 a bottle. Kilchoman is releasing a new family collection of Islay single malts, selected by the 5 members of the Wills family, with 11, 14, 18, and 20-year-old whiskeys in the range. The 14-year-old was made from barley grown on the distillery's Rockside farm, while the others were produced using heavily peated malt from Port Ellen Maltings. The collection will be available through whiskey specialist shops in the UK and overseas, but because of limited quantities, will not be available through the Kilchoman website. Suntory Global Spirits is coming out with the first new Connemara Irish whiskey in some time. This one is a lightly peated single malt matured in ex-bourbon barrels. It'll be available in France starting next month and elsewhere in Europe later this year, with a suggested retail price of €23.50 a bottle. Pierce Lyons Distillery in Dublin is releasing the Camino collection, tying in the historic St. James's Church where the distillery is located with the Camino de Santiago, or Way of St. James, the historic pilgrimage routes that lead to Spain's Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela, where St. James is believed to have been buried. The collection features 3 single-cask whiskies for now, 1 pot still and 2 single malts distilled at the church in Dublin. They're available at the distillery, along with co-owned Town Branch Distillery in Lexington, Kentucky, and a series of single casks will be released in the coming months. Finally, and it's a surprise that this hasn't happened before, Kingsbarns Distillery in St. Andrews, Scotland, has opened what is believed to be the first putting green at a Scotch whisky distillery. It's free for visitors to play, either before or after a distillery tour or lunch at the Kingsbarns Cafe. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by Dewars.
Throughout the years, Dewar's has created some incredible whiskeys. But our new Dewar's 12-year-old, that one's a personal favorite. It's the kind of scotch that earns praise from the pros, but still feels right at home in the middle of a good night with friends. Every pour opens up with notes of vanilla, toffee, baking spice, and a smooth oak finish. It's rich, it's approachable, and it has a way of bringing people together. Whether it's around the table, the fireplace, or just wherever the night happens to take you. Look, the glasses may hold the whiskey, but the whiskey, that's what holds the moment. Please enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2025, Dewar's is a trademark. Imported by John Dewar & Sons Company, Coral Gables, Florida. Blended Scotch whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume.
Let's check the calendar now and see what's happening around the world of whiskey. Friday is the deadline to register for the Bourbon Women's 15th Annual Symposium. It's August 13th through the 16th in Louisville, along with the Bar-A-Rama celebration on the 15th. Tickets are available at bourbonwomen.org. Tasmanian Whiskey Week gets underway on Saturday, August 1st, and runs through the 9th in and around Hobart, Australia. Royal Mile Whiskey's annual Whiskey Fringe runs from the 7th through the 9th at Mansfield Traquair in Edinburgh, Scotland. The Fraser History Museum in Louisville has an evening of bourbon, bluegrass, and history on the 13th. Sagamore Spirit Distillery's monthly Whiskey on the Waterfront party is on the 15th in Baltimore, Maryland, and the Brandy Library in New York City has a great Japanese whiskeys spirit school on the 15th as well. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Glendalough Irish Whiskey. 180 years ago, John Dewar opened his wine and spirits shop on the High Street in Perth, Scotland. He started blending whiskeys for his clientele, and the business grew into what we now know today as Dewar's. 27 years ago, Jacqui Seargeant started tracing that history as part of a one-year contract to help set up the Aberfeldy Distillery's Visitor Center. She's still there today and is now managing archives for all of Bacardi, with a special focus still on Dewar's. We spent some time on a Zoom call the other day. Take me back to 1846 when John Dewar opened his shop on the High Street in Perth. What do we know about his little shop?
Yeah, it's incredible to go back that far. So it's the 180th anniversary this year for Dewar's and John Dewar opening his shop. So it's really interesting to look back and just see how much has changed in that time. I think it's a little bit fascinating in so many ways. I was recently doing some research into that to kind of think about what it was like for him at that time. You know, he was 40 before he got married. And in 1846, when he was opening his shop, he just had his first child. So this was like the start of his life, and yet he was 41 years old at a time when life expectancy probably wasn't that great. So he was really taking some risks and doing something quite new and exciting at a time when probably he should have been winding down a little bit. And he went on to have 10 children as well, and his business was a huge success. And it's so different to what we know today. You know, this is before blended whiskey really took off. He was a wines and spirits merchant, and he was in a fantastic place to be one of those early pioneers of blending Scotch whiskey. But he was selling products from around the world. We know he was importing cognac, for example, from Otard, which is a brand that that Bacardi owns today. So it's a very sophisticated business, I think, if we look back at that for its time. It was really quite interesting.
How did he start blending scotches?
We believe that he was blending from probably about the 1860s onwards. And the family passed down the story that he would have been blending about 6 different whiskies in the blends he created, which is a bit of a contrast to today. I know you've spoken to Stephanie McLeod, our master blender, in the past, and she uses about 30 different whiskies in her blends. So it's kind of a little bit more of a naive approach, I guess. But his focus was very much on quality. So he was trying to create whiskies for the discerning customer, people who understood something that was really fine and, tasted fantastic. And we know he would have been maturing whiskey at a time when you didn't have to mature whiskey. This was a long time before the maturation rules for Scotch came into being. So he really was. He's really set the foundation for the company today. This creation of kind of pioneering and innovating and trying something new, but also focusing all the time on something that's really good quality, so that your customers really appreciate it.
How did his sons get into the business?
So it's an interesting transition story of when the sons of John Dewar started in the business. So John Alexander Dewar, who was the second eldest son, who showed a real aptitude for the business. The family called him like a chip off the old block. He was like his dad. He was like John Dewar, the founder. He had a brilliant blending ability and business ability. So he worked with his dad and became a partner with John Dewar during his lifetime. Then when John Dewar died, he actually left the business in the hands of his wife, Jane. Now, this is an interesting kind of discovery. We've only recently been really uncovering this story. So Jane's been a little bit hidden in the history in the past. So she'd brought up all the kids. She'd had the 10 kids, and they'd been an incredibly successful family. When John dies, his will leaves her as the sole executor and also in charge of the business, and with the suggestion that she brings John Alexander Dewar along with her, but for her to make that decision. So she inherits the business. She makes a co-partnery agreement with John Alexander Dewar. And together they start to manage the business between them. And at this time, this is a Scottish business. They've got a shop in Perth, but they're selling throughout the whole of Scotland. But they haven't really gone beyond that. And really, after they'd been doing that for a number of years, they brought in Tommy Dewar, who was the youngest son in the family. And he was very young at that time. So he would have been in his early 20s. And he became this real maverick marketing person. He was really interested in doing something new and pushing the boundaries. And the first thing he wanted to do was move to London and start to expand the business south of the border and out of Scotland. But we do know that when he moved to London at the age of 21 to do just that, his mum went with him. So Jane Dewar was this pivotal figure who managed the transition period from her husband's business into her son's really taking on the business and being mature enough, I guess, to be trusted to take it forwards. And it was a great success. I think those are those periods when people in business recognise, the transition from one generation to another can be very risky. That's when it can all go horribly wrong. But for Dewars, it transformed, actually. After that transition phase, then the business went global. So really that was kind of a lot. Bringing the sons in was a launch pad to something so much bigger, and that foundation that we have today with the international business.
What do you have in the archives from Jane Dewar?
Very little evidence of Jane survives. So we've got a couple of photographs of Jane, and we have the co-partnery agreement. So we have the agreement that was made between Jane and her son, John Alexander Dewar, and how the business was to work at that time. And then we have her signature that survives, because once a year they would do the profit and loss of the company, and the profits would be split between her and John Alexander, and then they'd both sign their kind of names to agree that they both had what they should have out of the business. So there's a few little things like that survive, a little bit of evidence. We've got a copy of the will from John Dewar, so we kind of obviously see her written about in there, and we can see that obviously she's a really trusted person from John's perspective. And there's some old photographs that we found with the Dewar family. So there are some old photos surviving of her in her younger days, which is really lovely to see. But really, it's small shadows, and that's why it's taken this long, really, to tease out that story and pull something together so that we can really represent her.
How does Tommy Dewar figure into the business after he starts selling in London?
Yeah, so he was the one that really wanted to travel the world and make his mark with exploring. And, you know, he loved to go abroad. He liked to try something new. And he was really into innovative marketing. You really get that vibe just from what he was doing. So he went to London first. He established the business there for Dewars, and that was a great success. And then in 1892, he decided to take a 2-year world sales tour around the world. So he packed up and set off for the US, first of all. Brilliantly, when he arrived in the US, he's said to have invented the first Scotch whisky highball. Obviously, you can never prove something quite like inventing something like whiskey and soda, since the two products were around. But he's said to have gone to a bar and asked for a whiskey and soda in like a tall glass. It wouldn't have been called a highball in those days. And then it was all in the press. The press were talking about Tommy Dewar and his highball invention. So he kind of was this character that was always wanting to try something new. And it's interesting about pieces of history like that, because they're really useful to us today, because we can tell that story about Tommy and his highball. And the company trademarked the words highball at the same time. So we've got this lovely little unique piece of history that's really useful today. And one of our signature serves with the brand today is the Dewar's highball. So it's kind of something, a good example of how our heritage influences our brand today. But he travelled the world, and he set up our global markets in 26 different countries at a time when travelling the world obviously meant travelling by boats and by carriages and trains. So quite slow progress. And he wrote about it. He absolutely loved travelling, and he loved meeting people. So I think he really made a massive impact on the business.
What else have you learned from the past that shapes today?
Yeah, it's a good question, because so much shapes the brand today. I think history is really at the very heart of Dewar's brand identity and what it's about. I think that was kind of obvious from the very beginning, because I was brought in on a 1-year contract to set up Dewar's Aberfeldy Distillery Brand Museum. And during the process of that, I was working with the marketing team, and it became obvious to them how integral the heritage was to the Dewar's brand. And so I was kept on, like 27 years later, I'm still here. And if you look at any bottle of Dewar's whiskey, you can just see how there's lots of heritage elements, like the foundation date and the signature of our founders. Some of the awards are on there as well. The heritage is really very much at the heart. So we work quite closely with our marketing teams. We work on new product development, in particular new packaging development as well. We work on websites, social media content and storytelling, our brand education, our brand home content and museum upgrades and stuff. There's a never-ending stream of really interesting projects that come along on the Dewar's brand, because the history is so engaging and the archive is so interesting. It's such an unusual and comprehensive and eclectic collection of artifacts and history. So it's a brilliant job to have.
Were people collecting this stuff before?
Yes. So the collection, to a certain extent, it survived through just people keeping things originally. That would have been its foundation. You know, it was really great foresight of somebody in the past who has kept bits of history through time for the brand. And then in more modern times, the modern archive has been created as archivists like myself have become, you know, kind of there's a very professional archivist community out there now. So it's an archive degree to become an archivist. You have to learn how to manage a collection like this and learn what to put in it, what to keep, what not to keep, because you don't want to keep everything that a business has produced in 180 years. Can you imagine how big the collection could be? You must have quite a big archive by now, actually, for your own business collection. So
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can't keep it all, can you?
Can't keep it all. Tell me how you got started in this business.
So I was working in archives before I came to the Bacardi company and to work on the John Dewar archive collection. But I actually had a background. I'd worked in the Scottish Brewing Archive, and I'd done a little bit of work for allied distillers. So I did an archive qualification, which is what you do in the UK. You do a degree in archive studies. I really had a passion for archives that I developed while I was doing my history degree, because I think when you access archives, most people don't get to. It's a real privilege. And when you do, especially really old stuff, maybe stuff from the 19th century or older, you just see how much it brings to life people from the past. So looking at they wrote, so the documents, say, written by John Dewar or whatever, seeing his handwriting and seeing photographs of these early people really kind of helps to bring them alive and gives you a little window on the past. And it often feels like quite a fantastic privilege. And I think, having worked in the Scottish Brewing Archive for a period, I'd learned about brewing archives, which are fairly similar, really quite a really interesting mix of records as well. Very similar production process. And then done some work for allied distillers and their distillery records, and visited some of their distilleries. I was actually working at Heriot-Watt University when the job at Dewar's came up, and it was only a 1-year contract. But I just thought, that sounds just really interesting. So I took a risk, and I went and I got the job, which was fantastic. And here I am, 27 years later. It's actually a real privilege to have been here all this time.
And you're the archivist for all of Bacardi now. How extensive is the Bacardi family archive?
Yeah, so we have collections. So the Bacardi company obviously owns a vast amount of brands and companies. So we have more than 15 archive collections for different brands and areas of companies within that remit, because that includes the Bacardi brand itself. It includes Martini and some of our French brands as well, which is like Benedictine liqueur and Nolly Prat vermouth. So we've got collections in 4 different countries, which is pretty extensive. And we're working on collections for our modern brands all the time as well, because an archive collection doesn't stop. You don't have a cut-off point like, we'll only take something in if it's 50 years old. We're trying to keep things right up to the present day, because the work the company does today is important as what it did 100 years ago. So we are trying to keep that comprehensive view, so that you can also look right the way through time on what's happened in the company and compare notes. So the Bacardi collection itself was gathered by the Bacardi family, and that's based in our Miami office in Coral Gables, which is just a wonderful collection. And it's managed directly by our heritage curator for Bacardi, who is a 6th-generation member of the Bacardi family. So it's also amazing to have her insights and her connection to the family, because it is such a kind of a personal collection, that one. It's quite complex, but wonderfully interesting.
What advice would you give to a young brand that's starting up now about starting an archive? It's something that a lot of brands don't think about until it's too late.
It's really true. And I think you've got to think about it from the beginning. Certainly before you get to the point where you want to start throwing things away or deleting them. That's the point at which you're probably starting to think about, what do I need to keep? What do I not need to keep? And if you can do that from very early on in your creation, you'll have a fantastic foundation for the future, because you've always got to be thinking ahead to, if I want to look back in 20, 30, 40 years' time, what will I want to know about this company? You don't necessarily know what you're going to want to look back on, so you have to keep a range of records, enough so that you can research into elements that you don't quite expect. I mean, if we think back to the things we get asked now for the past, we're often getting asked things like, what did women do in the industry 100 years ago, 150 years ago? 150 years ago, women were, really at the periphery of the industry, and nobody would have thought, jumping forward in time, that women were going to be equal in the industry and it was going to be a real theme to look into. So you just can't actually tell what's going to be interesting in the future. So you keep a range, but you don't keep everything.
How much of the collection is digitized?
That's a really good question as well. I'm not sure as a percentage, but we focus on digitizing elements that are most visual and that will be the most requested as a result of that. Because a lot of the stuff that's popular is the old advertising, the photographs, and some of the oldest handwritten documents of the founders, for example. So there's quite a wide range that's digitized, and digitizing is useful because it helps preserve the collection. If the things are digitized and you can just share digital copy, you're preserving the paper because it doesn't get touched as much. Because if you think, well, even over my 27 years, if I was handling the same things every day, things would be falling apart by now. So we do try not to handle things too much. And a lot of the old advertising is really beautiful and inspirational. So that can tell us quite a lot about how people were drinking Dewars historically. You get an awful lot of kind of lifestyle feel from them. And the original adverts that we have in our collection, a lot of them are artwork. They're real original paintings by artists from like the early 1900s to 1940s or thereabouts. Some of this stuff is really quite special, quite unique and very much usable in the modern time.
How do you preserve the liquid archive?
Yeah, that's very challenging. So we have a separate archive for the bottles of whiskey. So we've got, in total in our whiskey archive, we've got more than 2,000 bottles. I think about 1,000 of them are Dewars related. And we keep them in an air-conditioned room. We keep them separate from the rest of the archive. There's thinking that, if whiskey's flammable, and if this archive went on fire, you wouldn't want it to take out your paper archive as well, so we do keep it separate. There's also a fair bit of evaporation. You'll know if you've got your own whiskey collection. Even with a screw cap on a bottle, whiskey can evaporate to some extent. So there's obviously liquid moisture coming into the air from the bottles. So yeah, we have to manage it quite carefully and watch out for the humidity levels and try and reduce evaporation we sometimes put wraps on the caps, especially the oldest bottles when they're cork driven. By now our bottles from the early 1900s, the corks are disintegrating into the whiskey. So there's a lot of air exchange happening with that whiskey. So we quite often have to wrap them to stop them giving off too much in the way of moisture from them, because that can cause all kinds of problems. But it's a continuing challenge for all of the whiskey archivists. Actually, it's one of those things we talk about.
Do you talk with other archivists on a regular basis?
Yes, we do. The archive world is quite a small one. The archive profession is quite small, and the whiskey archive profession even smaller. So yeah, we have regular catch-ups. There's actually a drinks archivist call where we join up with other drinks archivists from other companies, so not just Scotch whisky, because we have similar challenges as well across managing our collections. So we share some of the things that we've learned, so that it can help each other in managing our collections.
Just the same way that distillers help each other out.
It's that kind of industry, isn't it? Yeah. So there's an awful lot of reciprocal relationships within the industry. So yeah, it's very, very friendly.
Anything else you can add I didn't ask about?
Oh, that's a really good question. Probably one of the things that's been quite interesting, especially in recent times, has been working with the blending team. So we obviously do a lot of work with the marketing team, but we work with the blending team quite closely to look for ideas for new product development, or ways in which they can do something different in the making of the whiskey. And one of the most exciting projects I worked on in the past was when I gave Stephanie access. Stephanie's our master blender. Gave her access to our old blending records. I actually didn't understand the old blending records. I have to say, I had looked at them, just looked like lists of different whiskies. And she looked at them and understood what the blenders were doing at that time. But not only did she understand it, she was really inspired by what they were doing. They were kind of pre-vatting groups of whiskies, according to whatever rules she was identifying from that. And she used that as her inspiration for the double range that she then introduced with her 4-stage aging process. So this was kind of her foundation point for that. And that was a fabulous moment in a way to be working with her on that. And then since then, we've worked with her and her team on a number of occasions, looking for ideas in the archive, things that we can kind of bring back, things that were done in the past, but also looking for ideas of what can we do in the present that's just inspired by the past. It doesn't have to be recreating something. It can be just something that you give a modern twist to. So at the moment, there's a few things in the pipeline that I can't talk about because it's all still top secret. But in the next year or so, and also maybe also in about 12 years, he'll probably see some of the things that we've been contributing to.
Thanks to Jacqui Seargeant for spending some time with us this week on WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Glendalough Irish Whiskey.
Our story begins in the wilds of County Wicklow, the Garden of Ireland, a place where nature moves slowly and meaningfully. Some whiskies blend in. Glendalough Double Barrel stands apart. I'm Rowdy Rooney, head distiller here at Glendalough, and I personally oversee our whisky making process from start to finish. We do things slowly, and we do them right. We start with a smooth, single-grain Irish whisky. We age it in flame-charred American oak for soft vanilla and a honeyed depth. Then we finish it in Oloroso casks from a small bodega in Spain. Casks we season and ship ourselves to make sure the wood is still alive with character when it arrives. That kind of care gives Glendalough Double Barrel its rich layers of dried fruit, warm spice and signature smoothness. This is a whisky at its own pace, and it's worth every second. This is Glendalough Double Barrel, crafted to stand apart.
This week's tasting notes are brought to you by Lost Lantern Whiskey. Let's start off with the Jackson Purchase Bottled in Bond Bourbon from Master Distiller Craig Bean. As always, it's bottled at 50% ABV. The nose has touches of caramel, brown sugar, leather, tobacco, and dried fruits. The palate is dominated by clove and cinnamon notes that fade slowly to reveal touches of honey, caramel, and dried fruits with a hint of brown sugar. The finish is long with lingering spices and a touch of mint. I'm scoring the Jackson Purchase Bottled in Bond Bourbon a 93. Widow Jane Distillery pulled together bartenders from New York's 5 boroughs to create the Widow Jane Borough Blend, a New York exclusive bottling. I received a sample this week, and it's bottled at 45.5% ABV. The nose has a nice balance of caramel, red apples, apricots, honey, and vanilla. The taste has strong black pepper and cinnamon notes that come to a peak, then fade to bring out notes of red apples, apricots, honey, and vanilla. The finish is long, dry, and spicy, and I'm scoring the Widow Jane Borough Blend a 92. Now, Denny Potter and Jane Bowie at Kentucky's Potter Jane Distillery are liars. I'm joking, of course, but they did say they weren't ever going to bottle someone else's whiskey while their own whiskey matures. They did. Big Vat Liar, as Denny and Jane have named this release, was finished in a combination of French and American oak with some hybrid casks that used both woods after consulting with the folks at Independent Stave Company. It's bottled at 54.8% ABV, and the nose is aromatic with a soft oakiness, caramel, brown sugar, apple cobbler, and honey. The taste is both peppery and fruity with black pepper and cinnamon on top of apple cobbler, oak tannins, brown sugar, and honey, and the finish is long and spicy with a touch of oak. I don't blame Jane and Denny for releasing Big Vat Liar. I just hope their own whiskeys are equal to it when they come out. I'm scoring Potter Jane's Big Vat Liar a 93. This week's tasting notes are brought to you by Lost Lantern Whiskey and the United States of Bourbon, a groundbreaking blend of bourbons from all 50 states. Lost Lantern co-founders Nora Ganley Roper and Adam Polanski spent more than 5 years visiting distilleries to find bourbons worthy of representing each state. It's one of the most ambitious projects in American whiskey, and in keeping with Lost Lantern's commitment to full transparency, every one of the distilleries is listed on the label. Together, they create a singular portrait of the diversity, innovation, and character defining American whiskey today. Find out more at LostLanternWhiskey.com. Lost Lantern, shining a light on the independent spirit. Let's open up the inbox now and see what people are talking about this week. Matt in Wheaton, Illinois, also had the chance to taste Big Vat Liar and posted these comments in the WhiskyCast community app. It's a solid pour, but I had a chance to taste their own distillate at 14 months, and it is really tasty. I hope they can drop something at 4 years and not wait until 6 like they said. Well, for what it's worth, I think Potter Jane is making some of the best tasting new make spirit out there, and I can't wait to taste it fully matured, whether it's at 4 years or 6 years. C. Don posted this note on the closing of Moonshine University at the end of the year. Downright tragic news out of Louisville. Moonshine U helped launch so many wonderful distilleries. I took several courses there myself, and the amount of knowledge they convey was almost overwhelming. Wishing everyone there the best in their transitions. Thankfully, it sounds like Stave and Thief Society will continue on. That is good news, and we'll keep you posted on further developments. Had one comment on last week's episode, specifically the Behind the Labels segment on research being done in Australia and Scotland to create a laser-based system for detecting methanol in potentially counterfeit spirits. Hugo Dart posts from Brazil. The Behind the Labels segment on a new way to detect toxic methanol inside unopened bottles was very interesting. Some of my fellow listeners may know we had a serious issue with that here in Brazil last year, when ethanol mixed with methanol was illegally sold by some gas stations. The substance was taken to makers of counterfeit spirits who sold them to bars all over Sao Paulo. About 25 people died, and there was widespread panic for a while. I hope new methods of detecting contamination reduce those risks for all of us. Amen to that, Hugo. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, download the free WhiskyCast community app from your app store and join the conversation. You can also find us on X, Threads, Blue Sky, Facebook, and Instagram at WhiskyCast, and our email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. I close out each episode with the line, WhiskyCast comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. Well, Haddonfield wasn't always dry. In fact, 250 years ago, when the Founding Fathers signed the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia, then hightailed it out of town to escape British soldiers, one of the places they escaped to was Haddonfield's Indian King Tavern, where history tells us the celebrations ran well into the night. The tavern exists today as a state historical site and museum, so what happened to turn the town dry? Well, after the end of Prohibition, Haddonfield was dominated politically by the Quakers and the Methodists, both of which were strongly opposed to alcohol. At the time, New Jersey gave every local government the power to decide for itself whether to allow alcohol sales, and Haddonfield said no, along with nearby Collingswood, Ocean City at the shore, and a few other towns here and there. It's been that way ever since, though we do have a small brew pub and a micro-distillery making vodka and gin now. But the restaurants are still BYOB, and the liquor stores are in adjacent towns. Personally, I'm in no rush to open up alcohol sales in my little town. Maybe it's because it would change the character of Haddonfield, or because I'm too lazy to come up with a new tagline after 21 years. If there's something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming show, just get in touch with us. That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, the calendar of events, my tasting notes, and much more, including an archive of all of our past episodes going back to 2005. Please consider leaving a rating or review for WhiskyCast on your favorite podcast app. It only takes a minute and will help other whiskey lovers discover the show. We love to hear from you. Download the free WhiskyCast community app from your app store, or find us on your favorite social media platform. Just do a search for WhiskyCast. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com. WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2026, and comes to you each week from the charming yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next week.